Welcome to Beyond the B, an ongoing dialogue about the past, present, and future of the B Corp movement. Co-hosts Emmy Allison and Ryan Honeyman facilitate an open and honest conversation about the B Corp movement, advise companies on how to increase their impact, and provide a deep dive into the new B Corp standards that are shaping our community.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, partner at Lyft Economy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Emmy Allison, also from Lyft Economy. Emmy, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. And so we're here today to talk about the recent announcement that B Lab Global made about recertifying companies and the due date for recertifying companies to submit on version 6, i.e. the current version of the B Impact Assessment. So we partially wanted to do this episode because we're not sure how many of you out there are aware that this change has come about. And it's sort of like a public service announcement to remind you of some changes. So first, we want to start off by saying this change only affects you if you are already a B Corp and you are recertifying. So if you are a new B Corp, you have until the end of 2025 to submit your assessment under version 6 before you would be required to submit under the new standards. So if you're a new B Corp, most of what we talk about today does not apply to you, but maybe it's helpful for you to know anyways. And if you are recertifying B Corp, the big news is that if you are a standard approach company, which is not 100% clear what that means. B Lab internal folks know what that means, but I think for folks outside, what we're parsing is it's for small to medium enterprises. So if you're a large multinational, you probably have a different timeline, but this is for small to medium companies on a standard approach with your submission due date between the 1st of July, 2025 and the 31st of December, 2025. You will now be required to submit your assessment under version 6 by June 30th as the sort of hard stop deadline. Otherwise, if you don't submit it by June 30th, you would be pushed into the new standards. Emmy, do you want to jump in?
I will just add that according to a knowledge base article that B Lab manages, and this article is kind of old for my preferences. September 2023, a lot has changed since then. But this article is listing small enterprises as typically less than 50 full-time employees and earning less than $10 million US dollars. And then small medium is typically 50 to 250 full-time employees or earning more than 10 million US dollars. And then medium, they're defining as typically companies with more than 250 full-time employees. Again, still not as specific as I would like, but that's the best I can come up with and with the receipts type situation.
Yeah, one way, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know if I'm on the standard approach or small to medium, you can actually go into your B Impact Assessment, which I think is now called B Impact. So impact.bimpactassessment.net. And under the certified dropdown, you can click on reviews and see what you can look at your past certifications and see what approach you're on.
Yes. And for recertifying companies and small, medium, particularly like I'm currently looking at the Lyft Economy, the last review that was closed in June of 2023. And the approach says recertification 2. So it's just like a little bit confusing. I think there will be some clarifications. If there's any way we can help folks figure out where they should be looking and what they should be doing, feel free to reach out. But yeah, I think that could have been a little bit more clear.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, the big news is if you're recertifying as a B Corp and you're a small to medium company, you have to submit your version 6 assessment by June 30th, 2025. So one reason this is a little shocking / annoying for me and Emmy is because we've been told by other folks within different parts of B Lab up until recently that clients would have until the end of 2025 to submit under V6. And that has been pushed up 6 months. So there's a lot of clients that we've been working with, and a lot of you out there may be surprised at this moving up the deadline. Emmy,
Yeah, I will just say the timeline has been relatively vague for a long time now, and that's kind of intentionally. I like feel deeply in my soul like the times. I remember the times where I never wanted to, what's the term, over promise and under deliver. And so I can understand the hesitancy around posting any dates because then you're, being held accountable to them. And I also will just say B Lab is the whole global network is just like a very large and complex system. And it's easy for things to get lost and slip through the cracks. And so I do think that obviously now and always, all B Labbers are always doing their best to keep us updated. And that's technically the role of our global partners, is to keep us as updated as they are. But the challenge is that they were not updated either. And so I think it's been quite shocking and surprising to literally everyone.
Yeah. So I think the message for folks at B Lab Global would be, we understand it's challenging and like hard to herd all these cats, and dropping something like this on the community brings up some trauma of like what has happened in the past with B Lab, like during those darker days of 2020 to 2022, 2023. So I would just say we get it. And you really got to try harder, I think, to not do stuff like this. And we're very forgiving. And so we're going to move past it, but also just know that it has been pretty hard for a lot of B Corps and for us as consultants trying to make sense of what's going on, and for B Lab staff at different global partners trying to make sense of what's going on. It's hard for them. So we'd love for communication and transparency to be increased around this kind of announcement in the future. And we're happy to chat with any of you about what that could look like. So maybe, Emmy, what is the rationale that B Lab is like? Why are they actually pushing companies to sort of move to this new standards timeline of June 30th, 2025 under version 6?
Yeah, it seems like their phrasing is something along the lines of recertifying companies have known for quite a while now that we're going to be transitioning standards. We've been certifying companies on version 6 for probably like 6 years now. Something like that, which is obviously at least twice as long as, and sometimes 3 times as long as other certification cycles or version cycles. And so I can definitely understand B Lab's sort of like urgency behind like, we are a movement committed to continuous improvement. And there has always been so much work that has gone into making sure that the standards are more reflective of our recent times and our current economy. That being said, it's still an aggressive timeline.
Yeah. And I mean, I get it as well. Like they say, so for folks who don't know, they have put together, B Lab Global has put together an FAQ because this was originally announced, to at least my knowledge, for the US and Canada, maybe earlier at different times, but around March 4th. But they say, there's complexities around delivering certifications and managing certification processes on two different set of standards at the same time. Like, we get that. So there's no argument that that's challenging. And maybe it's just how that's communicated and the implications of that announcement and how it might impact different companies is we'd like to see some improvements.
I will also say that it's very intentional that they chose standard approach to follow these guidelines. Theoretically, smaller and medium recertifying B Corps have more simple and straightforward verification processes. At the top of the episode, I was saying that for the Lyft economy, the last approach for certification for Lyft economy was called, quote, recertification 2. And the idea is that because we are less risky, we've had the same impact business models over the course of many years. It ends up being like a much more streamlined process for them to just like check a few things as opposed to selecting a full, like a 20%, 30%, 40% of our impact assessment. And so it makes sense to choose the small and medium enterprises, but again, is just like still difficult. And I think especially for small businesses and small B Corps who are under resourced or might not have like dedicated team members to do this, to like hurry up and submit this within 3 to 4 months.
The next thing that is important to note is that flexibility, B Lab notes that flexibility on whether B Corps can submit their version 6 assessment early will vary in different markets. So we don't actually know with certainty that this June 30th deadline is 100% the case for every single one of you listening. We do know it's for US, Canada. And what I would recommend you doing if you are in this sort of bucket of you're already a B Corp, you're supposed to be recertifying soon, i.e. in the second half of 2025, but they're pushing up the deadline, you probably reach out to your global partner and figure out, hey, is June 30th the deadline for my company, or is it different? Anything to add on that, Amy?
I will just say that I spent a solid 10 minutes trying to figure out, like, I just chose one global partner, B Lab UK, and I like deeply searched to see if I could find information about this for other B Corps. And I think it's intentional. Like they're relatively internal announcements. And then B Lab, is parsing out, like, has these email strategies where they're prioritizing these announcements for folks who it actually affects. But it was pretty difficult to find information on this. So yes, recommended that for folks who are not in the US or Canada and recertifying, that they connect with their global partner on that.
So just to be clear again, if you are a newly certified B Corp, this does not affect you. You have until the end of 2025. This is just for recertifying companies. Because you made a good point, Emmy, that B Lab is being strategic about who they were telling about this. I think the reason we're doing this is we're not actually sure that all the companies that are affected by this actually know that this is now the case. So we're trying to help companies who maybe are on this timeline that they didn't know about to know that this is a June 30th deadline. And
to be, again, super, super clear, because there's no such thing in the world of B Lab and B Corp, this announcement for US and Canada affects B Corps who are recertifying with submission due dates from the 1st of July to the 31st of December of 2025. And so your recertification date might look different, but you're supposed to be looking at your submission date to determine whether you're eligible for this. So for example, Lyft, it says in our impact app for Lyft Economy, it says that our recertification is due by June 12th, 2026. But then next to it, it says there's a submission deadline, and the submission deadline for us is December 12th, 2025. So we are one of those companies that falls within this, that this announcement is directed toward, because our submission date is before December 31st of this year.
Thank you for clarifying that. Because yes, there are a few clients that I'm working with where their recert date is in the first half of 2026. So they thought this wasn't going to be relevant to them, but their submission date is, say, in August 2025. So they are going to be subject to this. Maybe we should talk about, let's talk about what happens if you don't submit it. And then let's talk about why you would or would not want to go this direction. Because I think there's probably some value we can provide on like what's the strategy we recommend. So if you don't submit, let's say you're like, we just can't get it together. It's not going to happen. It's going to be after July 1st. So what does B Lab say is going to happen? So it says you're going to be moved on to a transition pathway. Your certification will remain in good standing by taking some actions on steps to familiarize yourself on the new standard and prepare for recertification on the new standards. The specific steps, like what that actually means, will be communicated in April when the standards are published, including a self-assessment against the new standards and an action plan to attain the new standards. Details of this extension will be shared when the standards are published. And the last thing it says is B Corp's due for recert after the 1st of January 2026 and beyond will be assigned to a cohort for processing of their recertification once the new certification process is launched in 2026. So basically, to translate, if you don't submit by June 30th, then you're going to be on the new standards, and B Lab will let you know what that actually means after the new standards are released in April.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in this cohort strategy because I'm all about like collaborating wherever possible, especially with other B Corps. And I think there's a lot of power in in trying to figure stuff out together. I still haven't personally seen the next version of the assessment tool. And so this is still just like looking very vague. And we shall see how that goes. We should find out actually probably pretty soon after this episode is released. But yeah, it sounds like they have a plan for folks who, again, submission dates are July 1 through December 31st of this year, and then don't submit an impact assessment before June 30th.
So one thing we don't know is, like, let's say your recertification date is August 2026 and your submission date is, say, February 2026. But you're like, I really want to recertify on version 6, even though you're not within this window. I'm not actually sure what B Lab would do if you filled out an assessment preemptively and submitted it. It probably wouldn't work, but you might want to reach out to your global partner to figure out. I think this is pretty specific about who it applies to, but it just brings up in my mind, if you're a company that like really wants another go at version 6, even though you're not maybe in this window, what would happen if you submitted early? I don't actually know.
Yeah. And I will say that in like a Q&A session of sorts, someone has asked that question, and the response was that, like, from B Lab, was that they weren't sure, and they also like probably wouldn't recommend it, but I would definitely try. I think it's worth sending an email to community and asking, or to your global partner. Sorry. I will also say that some of the folks we talked to at B Lab US and Canada, and obviously they're getting their information from B Lab Global, when asked about like being able to certify on version 6 for as long as possible, the outlook was something along the lines of like, let's just try it. See what happens. Like let's like kind of like take a leap of faith for the new standards. And I certainly respect it. And as someone who values experimentation and a culture of failure and a culture of growth, that does sound intriguing. But I do think it's worth sort of like saying what B Lab is trying to communicate, which is like, just give it a try and don't worry too much. I don't know if I personally feel that way, but that was kind of like the message that I was getting. What did you like get something similar, Ryan?
That message may be a function of, it's a little bit of the separation between B Lab Global and the global partners. So this is probably a whole nother like podcast topic, but just how much it's changed for a lot of people to have B Lab Global make decisions and then for global partners to have to sort of react to those decisions. And, there's a lot of reasons why that change was made. And there's a lot of, especially around one in particular, not wanting, like, say, a US based company that, say, like knows people at B Lab US and Canada to get favorable treatment or something because B Lab US and Canada is the one doing the certification. Now that it's at global, there is a little bit of separation. So it's a lot more, it's less like, oh, who type thing. And it also, this is a long way of saying that feeling that you're mentioning is probably coming from the like US and Canada is trying to hype people up like, hey, let's just jump in and try this. But it's also like, we don't actually know either what's coming. So yeah, there's probably ways to tighten that up in the future with just how, again, global is interacting with the community and with the global partners. So one other thing before we transition to Lyft's opinion is on large enterprises. So say you're a large company, what does this mean for you? In B Lab Global's FAQ, which we'll link to in the show notes, it does say for large companies, given that large enterprises and multinational companies are different than that of standard approach companies, they're still working to finalize that pathway. And they will communicate what the pathway is when the standards are launched in April, basically later this month, because we're going to be in April when this is released.
I will also add that I cannot find a definition for large enterprise approach. So I do think that if you look in your impact assessment and you were a large enterprise, the last certification cycle, it will tell you whether you are large. And I think that's one of the few instances. But that's something that would also be a little bit more helpful. I think about how the definitions and the way that they like put different companies in different categories based on their sizes, that it has changed since I was at B Lab. And even when I was at B Lab, like quote unquote on the inside, I still had to like quadruple check every single time, like what the thresholds were. So I do think maybe there's like a little bit of constructive feedback there. It's just like, it would be helpful to see maybe all in one place what the thresholds are for small, medium, and large.
Right. Which I know the new standards does have, but the draft standards does have that. But maybe it's a little unclear of like if we're using the definitions for the new standards on which approach we're on, or we're using the previous standards definitions of sizes. See, I'm glad that the listeners get to hear this because me and Emmy do this every day and are really big nerds on B Corp and still have a hard time parsing through things. So, okay, so let's talk about what do we actually think people should do. So let's say, Emmy, you're a company that the small to medium enterprise or a standard approach, and your recert date is, I don't know, maybe in 2026, but your submission date is August or September of 2025. So you're falling into this category of like, should I or should I wait? Should I submit? Lyft, we fall into that category. So how are you thinking about like pros and cons of what to do?
Well, the time-old answer to most questions in the B Corp world is it depends. I think that Lyft economy is an interesting example because, like I said, we have had a similar business model over many years. We've had similar impact business models over many certification cycles. I wouldn't expect my recertification to change that materially if we were to submit Lyft economy on version 6 by June 30th. It would be, for the most part, a relatively straightforward process. The only exceptions for that is if you try to add some new impact business models, those like, designed to give, and serving underserved populations, serving purpose-driven enterprises. If you're opening up any new IBMs, that makes your review a little bit more complicated, but still on the whole, it's going to probably be a lot more simple than if you're going to wait until you certify on the new standards. And I should also clarify too, like that is what B Lab is requesting. That's the language that they're using, is that they're calling the next version of the standards the new standards, like capital N, capital S, new standards. And we're not supposed to call it version 7, but the current standards, version 6, is something we're still referring to as version 6. But yes, I think a company like Lyft Economy, it would make a lot of sense to stay on the current standards as long as possible. And I would probably say that for most companies. That also being said, Lyft Economy we will probably very intentionally wait, because this is something that we want to understand and we want to help our clients understand, and are looking for as many learning opportunities as possible to interact with the new standards and also apply them. And so I personally hope we get put in this interesting cohort thing that they're mentioning here, in some sort of transition plan, because we get to help others go through this. Would you add anything, Ryan?
Yeah, great summary. I do think I've been recommending to clients that the original timeline we were told by folks at B Lab gave recertifying companies till the end of 2025. So there was a couple clients I was working with where we were on that timeline. And then this June 30th, really accelerated things. But what I've been telling folks is we've already been doing a lot of work on version 6. So let's just keep it going. Let's just keep the progress going. We don't actually know what the final version of the new standards will look like. So there is some risk in waiting. And for example, it might be harder to meet certain requirements on the new standards than anticipated. And so for most clients or most people I'm speaking with, it's like, let's press the rocket fuel accelerator button to just get this done in the next 3 months before June 30th, which we do help companies with B Corp certification. So if you're listening to this and you're like, we want to get it done by June 30th, reach out to us and we can help you, or reach out to any of the B consultants. They're all great people. And another reason, like one risk of waiting, is B Lab talks about like there's going to be a self-assessment and you have to remain in good standing, and there's going to be in this transition to the new standards, but we don't actually know what this like gray area waiting period is for B Lab dropping this on us very quickly of like, hey, you only have till June 30th. They could theoretically do that again with the new standards, like say it's only a 6-month window, or like there's not a ton of time to actually do the new standards sufficiently. And I don't think they would do this. it's pretty low probability, but there is a risk. So if you're someone listening to this and you're just thinking of like, do I do version 6 or do I wait? So I think recertifying now on version 6 is what I'm recommending to most people, because it also allows you to bypass this like initial learning curve of the entire B Corp community on the new standards. It allows you to recertify in a few years once all the bumps have been ironed out. So we're like, Lyft is kind of an anomaly. We're like, let's wait because we want to see what it looks like. But for most people, I would say it is looking like version 6 is the way to go.
Yeah, and I'll just say it doesn't feel like a complete conversation without acknowledging that a lot of folks are worried about meeting the new standards. We have talked about this lots of times over the course of the podcast. We hear this out in the community. The new standards are intentionally, they are raising the bar. And so therefore, they're just inherently more difficult to meet, but also just like there's still so many unknowns. And the first time that you're going to certify on the new standards, it's just like inherently going to require a lot more energy and effort. There's parsing through the new standards and figuring out, you're trying to like translate the B Lab language. And like, while they're extremely helpful in sharing like different resources and things like evidence, and they're very prescriptive about what you're submitting, it's still a large volume of work that will need to happen in order to be able to meet these standards. And I don't want to scare anyone. Everyone should try it, please, and definitely. But we say this to say, like, if you can certify on the existing standards, it makes sense, and then use that time to really dig in and please start preparing for the new standards, like as soon as you're finished with your current cycle. We like to say that folks should start preparing for recert at least a year in advance. And this is very much an exception to the rule. You should start working on the new standards as soon as possible, even if you end up meeting this June 30th deadline and being some of the last to recertify on version 6.
And B Lab's very clear in their communication about this. Like, if you're not in by June 30th, you're not on version 6. So this isn't like, hey, July 1st or July 2nd, can we just have a few extra days? The answer is probably no. I mean, the answer is no already. I don't know if there's any wiggle room. You could email your global partner to figure it out. But this is like a hard stop date. This isn't flexible.
That's a great point. And I don't even know if I would try in that regard. Like June 30th, if you have to tell yourself it's June 25th and you give yourself a little grace period, I really don't think they're going to accept anything after that.
Yeah. So, that's, I think, the sum of what, the news we wanted to pass along. I do think, just as a reiteration, so folks are like taking away the key points here, this is only for recertifying companies on the standard approach. It's large and multinational companies. We don't know yet. It's going to be announced soon when the new standards are released. We do recommend going for version 6 if you can. It's not terrible or bad if you have to wait to the new standards. We're choosing to wait. And we do, even though we're recommending going on version 6, we just want to be clear that we're a big supporter of the transition to the new standards. And like, this isn't a bad thing at all. It's just reducing risk potentially to go on what we know. And if you have more questions, we'll link in the show notes B Lab Global's FAQ about the decision. Emmy, anything else to add?
Yeah, there are lots of resources out there for you to be able to complete your research. Ryan mentioned that this is something that we do. There's lots of really wonderful B consultants out there that you can find on the B Lab US and Canada directory, and then other global partners have other professionals that will help you with this. The Lyft Economy team, we put on an office hours every month. It's called B Corp Office Hours, and anyone can drop in and ask like your most technical of technical questions. It's no obligation. And the Beehive has also, I think, historically been pretty helpful in terms of crowdsourcing answers to the information that you're looking for. And then also, obviously, the knowledge base with a little caveat of like, make sure the article has been updated relatively recently, which is like in KB years, like 1 to 2 years in KB time. But yes, lots of resources. If you're ever lost or looking for answers, definitely feel free to reach out.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And we are excited to see the drop of the new standards coming very, very soon. So we'll talk to you pretty soon after they drop, probably. Thanks, Emmy.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Bee. We are trying to grow our audience and wanted to ask you a huge favor that you can do right now. Try to think of one person that might like this show. Then pull out your phone and text them something like, "Hey, I think you might like this new podcast, Beyond the Bee. Check it out at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts." Seriously, try to text someone right now. Pull out your phone. Then follow up with them to see how they liked it. This would be super helpful for us. We deeply appreciate your support.